Welcome to Ideagen TV. We are thrilled today to have with us Greek Ambassador to the European Union, Ioannis Vrailas.
Hi, George. Great to see you again. So that I can see you, from close range as we did last year, that wonderful summit in Athens.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, it feels like it's been decades. We just started 2020 looking at this decade leading into the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And what an interesting time it's been, in quotes. I know that with your newest post as Ambassador of Greece to the European Union, you are helping to lead up so many discussions and efforts on behalf of Greece as a member state, which is quite different actually than your previous role, representing the entire body of member states of the European Union to the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to start out by asking you, what is different about your new role, your newest role, and how have you learned, how have you taken lessons from that and applied those to your current role as a Greek ambassador to the European Union?
Well, that's a great question, and it was something that had me worried a little before I actually took up the job. It's true that when you represent the union, your main concern is not to look at what your national interest is, but what the common interest of all EU member states is, and therefore you coordinate with all of them. It was 28 member states when I was there. Try and find that common denominator that will allow you to have a common position, and then go out vis-a-vis the third countries and defend that common position. And it was quite a fascinating experience to represent the EU and negotiate on its behalf. And you're talking on the par with the US, with Russia, with China, with the G77, with everyone. So it's something that I will always cherish, and I think it'll be a feather in my cap. Now, when this job was offered to me, I just thought it would. It's really a fantastic challenge to be able to represent the Greece in the European Union. We are a member state. We have our policies, our priorities, our positions, and to defend them, I think is such a great honor. And I believe that the experience I had working for the EU for 8.5 years, I was also permanent representative of the European Union to the OSCE in Vienna. The knowing how you can achieve a compromise, even when positions among member states seemingly are very far apart, I think has greatly helped me in trying to forge alliances with other member states, in trying to find the language that would serve Greece's interests while at the same time not rocking the boat. It has allowed me, I believe, to be much more effective in my job. It's also a job here in the EU where you cover so much ground. At the end of the day, multilateral diplomacy, there's a technique about it, and whether you're representing the European Union or Greece or anybody else, so long as you put you do it with passion and you put everything you have into it, as with everything in life, then hopefully, not always, because politics is politics, and you're not playing on your own. There's others. There's many other actors in the field. But at the end of the day, the best possible result will be there. So it's been a truly great experience. The one thing I had not foreseen was how drastically the agenda would change. I arrived here on the 10th of January. I did the rounds. I made about 100 courtesy calls. I was ready to start capitalizing on my network, my connections, and my knowledge of the issues. And then, of course, the pandemic struck hard, and it has all been about basically about how to deal with the crisis in various fields, health, the borders of the EU, an issue which is very close to Greece, not least because of tourism, but then also economic recovery, and dealing with the economic and social impact of the crisis. We just finished a marathon of the European Summit. It started on Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it finished on Tuesday morning at around 6 o'clock in the morning. So a record. Never had EU leaders met for so long. Lots of sleepless nights, lots of negotiations. But we ended up with a good result for Europe and a very good result for Greece. So it was rewarding to see that all this effort that was put. We had a great delegation headed by the Prime Minister, great teamwork, and we really achieved the best possible results. So it's good also for Europe that the member states coming together around a good recovery plan, which will hopefully allow the European economies to deal with the crisis.
It's incredible to hear about the work that's being done in your new role. It's such an incredibly new vantage point for you. And yet at the same time, it's a building block from where you were. It's stackable. So in other words, your experiences have actually built upon and culminated in this role as the ambassador of Greece to the European Union, which I think for the millions of people that will watch this interview will be fascinating to hear about how the EU works. I mean, and how does a member state work and function within this process? And along those lines, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, how has communication changed and affected your ability to conduct your role as the ambassador of Greece to the European Union? There's technology, it works, obviously, but that in-person component as well, I think the combination is really powerful. But for our global audience, I'd love to hear, how are you adapting to this current situation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we had to adapt at home, meaning in the office, in the premises of the EU permanent representation to the EU. We had to make sure that people would, first of all, be safe. That was our first priority, and of course, at the same time, the EU never closed shop, and there was work to be done. So myself and a few good colleagues, we came here day in, day out. The committee of the permanent representatives of the member states to the European Union, it's called COREPER, was the only multilateral body that kept meeting non-stop throughout the crisis. And we did that because for official decisions to be adopted, you need a physical meeting. VTCs will not do it. So we kept meeting, and in that sense, we maintained that human contact with the other colleagues that you referred to, and there's a sense of pride among our colleagues that we managed to hold the fort and to keep the EU going in spite of the pandemic. But you're absolutely right. The human factor is irreplaceable. I don't know how you're dealing with the crisis. I guess there's a lot of VTCs, a lot of you spend a lot of time in front of your screen. But when I refer to a technique in multilateral diplomacy, it's all based on human contact, really. Meeting the other person, putting yourself in his or her shoes, trying to establish that level of trust, ideally a friendship, that will allow you to sit down together. Hey, you've got a problem, I've got a problem. How is it that we can find that happy medium? And I simply do not believe that it can be done via VTC. I mean, even us who kept meeting every day, in the meeting room, we had to take some precautionary steps. We could not get close to one another. I can show you pictures of dinners where we're like 2.5 meters. I don't know how many yards that would be. Basically, you had 30 people in the room, a room which looked like an American football stadium. You had to score a touchdown from one goal to the other to be able to get to the colleagues who were on the other side of the table. And so even with that kind of physical presence is not enough. If you cannot invite your colleagues to lunch, spend an hour and a half together, invite them to dinner, get to meet their partners, learn a little about what their kids are doing, what their interests are, talk about something different than just work, then it's very difficult to make the kind of inroads that are so much needed to establish that teamwork, which is then conducive to compromises, results, decisions that are so badly needed. So I may be old school, but I still maintain that human contact is irreplaceable, and not just irreplaceable. It's the one thing that can keeps business, not necessarily business like in the private sector, but the conduct of business going, whether it's now private or public or multilateral or bilateral, it doesn't really matter. It's all about people and getting to know them and getting to work with them.
Well, and it's incredible to hear your perspectives and what happened and what was happening during those initial days of the global pandemic, when the EU, the European Union, was still functioning, obviously, and the work of the EU and governments across the world still had to function despite the unknown.
Right.
So many unknown factors that were scary and are still not, disconcerting on many levels. I think we now know perhaps more on the science of this, and maybe we're making more progress on a vaccine, et cetera. But it's also heartening to see the relationship of the United States with the EU and how important it has been and will be during the pandemic, and how that coordination has evolved as well. In terms of empathy, I heard you mention something that has come up a lot in a lot of recent interviews with global leaders like yourself. Empathy, sitting in someone else's shoes, imagining yourself in someone else's shoes, and trying to better understand, perhaps. And at the minimum, a key part of diplomacy, I believe, is listening. Being able to listen. You understand what you would like. Also important to listen to your colleagues. How do you see empathy playing a role in all the work that you've been doing, and certainly the work that you will be doing in the future?
Well, as you said, it's an absolutely key component of what we do. Some of the best results I have achieved was when I, as I said, put myself in the shoes of the other side. Maybe another side with which I disagreed, not personally, but those were the instructions, or those were my either countries or international organizations' positions. I disagreed thoroughly. Now, and I would ask myself the question: now, if I were in his or her position, what would I be ready to accept? How far would I be ready to go to get a compromise if I really wanted one? And if I found that, then I would ask myself the other question: okay, that line, that extra step that they would be ready to take, is that enough for me? Am I ready to concede a little of the ground that is needed so that we can actually meet? And you try your luck. I mean, once you have made that effort, you try your luck. You have to be very careful, because if you indicate to the other side that if you tell them, so let's say that I'm at 0 and they're at 100, and I tell them, well, would you be interested in looking at say 60 or 70? You're already indicating that you are ready to give up on 30 or 40. So you have to be very careful, in which moment of the negotiation you do that step, and you have to take several other factors in. But once you make the step, you see what the reaction is, and if they're ready to go in that direction, you have the makings of a compromise. And sometimes, especially in a multilateral setting, you also prove to all the other actors that, hey, I was ready to make even if it doesn't work, you can convince your other partners that, hey, I was ready to make the move, but they're intransigent. So you gain up, on the moral high ground in any case. So I think it's always an investment to be ready to listen to the other side, and to be able to to show the kind of empathy that you rightly referred to. I think it's an investment in the long run. People take you more seriously. If you may win, you may score big on one point, but if you do it in a clumsy way, then it's not necessary that you will end up doing it again and again. And being there for the long haul, long-term results, I think, is much more important than a quick fix or a quick win.
And what you're describing is a key element of leadership as well, because while winning and in any negotiation is important, I think it's also important to look at the long term as well, and the implications of that. Like you said, today winning, and tomorrow perhaps that limits what your ability is to lead. If you were to think about leadership, it's embodied in your role representing an EU member state, in this case Greece. Why do you think that effective leadership and the elements we just discussed, combined with innovation, are so crucial now more than ever, Mr. Ambassador?
Right. I mean, we live in very turbulent times, and we also live in times where so people are faced with difficulties, but they also have all those social platforms. They can speak their mind. Sometimes they can feel that they don't necessarily need a leader, because the old-time politicians, they were a bit of the middleman between themselves and the centers of power. So now they can express their views on any of those social platforms. This, however, doesn't help in finding the solutions to the so many problems that our societies are faced with. And therefore, this is where you need leaders who can inspire, leaders who have a vision, leaders who can be convincing, and leaders who can ensure the necessary buy-in from a large number of citizens, so that their vision can then be implemented. Ideally, it's a vision that that is based on certain rules, on certain values, on certain principles that we hold dear in our societies. Because there's also leaders around the world, and we've got a few also in our neighborhood who are of a more autocratic, let's say, they're a bit more autocratic, and therefore they lead their people. They may be very effective, but they don't necessarily lead their nations to the kind of economic, social, democratic development that is needed. So you also need to make that distinction when it comes to leadership. It has to be, you have to have vision, you have to be decisive, you have to be inspiring, but you also need to base yourselves on certain values and principles that are very important.
And in a recent interview with the EU ambassador to the United States, he mentioned something that I found really, profound from a philosophical standpoint, which was that today we don't need or shouldn't look up to heroes. In other words, the whole notion of the leader being the hero is yesterday's lead. In other words, leaders need to be empathetic, as you said. They need to be able to represent the people, not dictate to the people, right? And that's really what you're describing. It's being able to understand what the people want, need, look around the corner. You need to be able, as a leader, as you've said many times, to look around the corner, to always be looking around the corner at what's coming at either your country or the bloc or whatever it may be. And I think the type of leadership you've displayed and have described today is absolutely critical to solve so many of the world's most vexing issues. And you mentioned, the social media and, all of the other elements. I mean, while it can be empowering for individuals, I think there's also another side to it, which is that it can cause confusion in terms of the leadership piece. And so it's incredible for anybody on the planet now to be able to talk about inequity, inequality, and any other issue that they see that can be brought to the attention of individuals that can actually solve the issue. And we can all begin by solving those issues in our own communities. As you've seen during the pandemic, there's been a bright light shining on inequality, on inequity. And I'd like to hear, Mr. Ambassador, what you see in that realm. In other words, you're representing an entire country within the European Union. Greece has been through so much. It's been through so much. And now the planet, which obviously includes Greece, is facing this hidden enemy, this virus. I'd like to first commend you and Greece and your leadership, the Prime Minister and everybody, on how Greece has handled the crisis of this pandemic. And at the same time, talk to you about, do you see a shining light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I was going to mention that in terms of leadership and effective leadership. And it is true that Greece, one casualty from the pandemic is one too many. But when you compare our numbers, which are still below 200 deaths, to those of other countries in the world, including EU partners, it is a fair point that we did as a country extremely well. Now, for that, we had a government that did show leadership. They took decisions early enough, hard decisions, not easy to have them accepted in principle. But then through a combination of empathy, a combination of being convincing that this is the right path, this is what we ought to do, and a little, a bit of a stick in the form of heavy penalties for those who didn't follow the rules. The government ensured the buy-in from the population that was badly needed to make sure that the virus would not spread. Now, we Greeks, we have a reputation of not being particularly disciplined or organized. And it was fascinating to see how we went digital. If you wanted to go out, there was you had to you could ask for authorization through your mobile phone. I mean, this may sound fairly obvious, but it would have been unthinkable in Greece a few years ago. So we've covered a lot of ground, and here again, there's a lot of pride among the Greek people for having done well, even if this crisis comes just when we were after the sacrifices that we made for all those years since the previous economic crisis. We were looking for better days, and unfortunately now we have to start another recovery effort. So and that was actually one of the key issues in the European Council meeting. How is it that EU member states can come together to make sure that this recovery effort is well funded in a spirit of solidarity and collective effort? You asked me about whether I see anyway, light at the end of the tunnel or something like that. You know, the joke, I saw light at the end of the tunnel. It was a train coming in the opposite direction. I'm always an optimist, and you have to be. You have to be if you're doing this job, because you always want the best results for your country, and you always want the best results for Europe. You want the best results for the world, for the planet, as you rightly said. Because one thing that we have learned in the past 20, 30 years is that nobody can solve any issues alone. And when there's a virus, when there's climate change, when there is organized crime, when there is also all those horizontal threats and challenges that humankind is faced with, it's only by joining forces that we can best tackle them. This is what we're trying to do in the EU. Not always easy. There's a lot of sometimes skeptics that say, "Well, we'd be better on our own. We don't need that other member state, or we can well do without. We're better off on our own." Basically, is the line. But what we have seen in Europe is that still there's a majority of people who believe that if we stick together, we're much better off economically through the single market and the Eurozone, politically through our common voice in the international fora and on the international scene.
And it's also emblematic of leadership. So if you have, the European Union collectively leading on any issue based on negotiations and agreements, it appears that you can have a better result representing the people, and the entire group of nations, as opposed to one nation of the member states. So I think that drives that critical piece of leadership that we've talked about, and it's what an incredible story for Greece as well, and the leadership of Greece and handling this pandemic. I think we're all in this together. And what I really like about what you said, as always, and you've always said this, is that we cannot do this alone. And that brings the business, the corporate arena into the discussion. I've been hearing a lot lately about from CEOs or diplomats or NGO leaders about the business case for achieving the global goals. Mm-hmm. That specific business case. In other words, these 17 global goals of the United Nations that we talk about so much have laid out a path, a roadmap, a very clear direction on what needs to happen. We can talk about in another discussion about whether we've been set back or whether there's been acceleration toward achieving those goals based on the pandemic. But for this discussion, I'd like to ask you, in terms of those 17 goals, the business case, how important is it for a business to espouse a company a corporation anywhere in the world, how important is it for them to embrace the goals from a business case standpoint?
Well, it's really about the future that we're talking about. Maybe not yours, not mine, but that of our children and the grandchildren. Okay, the business case is the current situation sustainable? And if the answer is no, it's not. Okay, it's a bit of what I was saying a little earlier about me making a quick diplomatic win when if I manage to achieve that, but that not being necessarily a long-term investment. There will be times where I may end up paying more for that quick win than I would wish for. It's the same with business and the Sustainable Development Goals. I think if you go greener, if you try to implement those goals, then you are bound to be ahead of the curve when it comes in a few years' time. If you make the effort now and the adjustment now, you will see that there will come a point where the people will be asking for those kind of changes that you were not willing to implement, and the customers will be asking for those changes, and it might be too late to adapt. So the sooner you get the technology, the sooner you espouse the principles that are enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals, the sooner you convince your government to make sure that you may function as a business against the backdrop of rule of law, where rules are clear, watertight. There's no corruption. Human rights are defended. If you make that case, this will probably lure investors much more than if you don't have those. If you're lagging behind in the implementation of that goal, if you don't make sure that women are empowered, whether it's in government or in business, it's been proved time and again how much that means in terms of actual economic gains when you achieve that, etc., etc., etc. If you don't make sure that our oceans are clean, so there was. I have to admit that we've been focusing so much on tackling the pandemic, the recovery effort, that we may have forgotten in the past few months the Sustainable Development Goals. But one of the things that came out of that very long European summit I was referring to is that governments still insist on a policy which is called the Green Deal, making sure that again Europe is a pioneer when it comes to going green. That means having the technology, making sure that you can sustain your economy, even if you change the economic model that was supporting it for decades. And so, out of this crisis, there's also an opportunity that you can rebuild. I'll give you an example. You know how important tourism is for Greece. Now, tourism has been and will be hit very hard this year. We had 32 million tourists visiting last year. If we get to 5 this year, because of the pandemic, it will be a triumph. But maybe it's an opportunity, or instead of having the masses overflowing the beaches, and maybe it's an opportunity to also develop a form of green tourism, which will be much more sustainable in the long run, and which would attract another type of tourists. So in the end, you would be making just the same amount of money, or even more, in a much more sustainable environment than if you just keep repeating the same model again and again, and then you end up with polluted beaches and the like. So there are opportunities even in this even under the current circumstances. I spent when I was with the EU at the UN. I spent countless hours and again long days and long nights working for the SDGs. And I have to say that Ideagen has been a pioneer in championing them and linking them to the concept of leadership. And so it's good to be having this conversation, because you also remind me, after those long discussions I've had with my EU partners on recovery from the pandemic, to remind us of the longer term and what can be achieved.
That's right. And I think the leadership on that issue has been steadfast. And you mentioned the empowerment of women and, of course, girls across the planet. It's so amazing to see always really the EU leading, especially on that issue. And, we've seen and during this pandemic, the highlight on inequality, not only in the United States, but across the planet. And I think it's a moment for people to think about, for companies, for NGOs, and of course for governments, to think about these inequalities. As in the United States with the zip codes. If you're fortunate enough to live in a certain zip code, you can have a wonderful school system. You can have better health care. You can have access to more nutritious food. You can have more access to jobs, etc. But if you're not, then you're left behind. And that's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable today. It's unacceptable, of course, yesterday, and it's certainly unacceptable tomorrow, when we now know, when this light is shining on these communities, where people are being left behind. And this applies to the entire planet. I mean, what the pandemic has shown is the stark inequalities across the world in certain areas for individuals. And so these SDGs allow for us to rethink and refocus on what is important. And if you're an NGO, you're trying to make an impact. If you're a government leader like yourself, you're trying to create these critical policies that can foster and fill those gaps to empower everybody on the planet. And then if you're a company, you can look at it from a business standpoint. You can say, look, we can do more good, we can make more money, and we can do more good. It's not separated out by doing good means you're not going to do well. Actually, if you take the business case for the global goals, you can actually do better and do more good. So that's very exciting. Right. I'd like to shift.
Just one comment on this. And for those of us who live on the, we're lucky to be on the, to have a good zip code, if I dare say, one that guarantees a certain level of, good living standards, just that you described them. What has been proved in recent times is that those who are not in the similar condition, they will want to move. And they will have had enough in their, in the bad zip code area, and they will try and move to the good zip code area. This is where migration, refugees, asylum seekers, that's by the thousands and the tens of thousands and the millions. This is where the problem stems. So this is again a reminder of how important it is for this to tackle all these problems together. Because if you fight the root causes of inequality, the major problem of our times, if you fight the root causes, then maybe young people, if they have a job back home, they'll be happy to stay back home. They won't necessarily want to come to the States or to Europe, and so very, very, very important to remember that. You may be comfortable in your zip code today, but it won't last forever if you just sit idle.
That's right. That's an incredible message. And I think also what has been highlighted during this pandemic has been the digital divide, which goes directly to what we're talking about. The EU, by all accounts, has been leading on helping to address access to broadband, to the internet for individuals all across the member states. And in the United States, we still have the same issue. We have, communities and individuals that have no access to broadband and to the internet to then provide for their families, either by working or access to the technology and information. Just simply having access to that information. Also, on the education front, the technology has been absolutely essential, and I know it has been in the EU, to continue some form of education for students. And what we've seen in the US and other parts of the world is that another bright light on inequality, where certain students have access to the technology, to the computers, et cetera, and others don't. And so you're having another digital divide here, which now we know, we see it, we can address it. And I think it's an opportunity for everyone, for the EU, for the United States, for other countries to say, we've seen it, and now we can try to fix it.
Right.
So,
it's an interesting contradiction, however, because even in the, some of the poorest parts of the world, you still have people who may be on earning, around $1 a day, but who still own a cell phone somehow. They
right.
Right. So but at the end of the day, it's not so much having access, also the quality of the access. I believe it's important. And I mentioned the Green Deal as one of the top EU priorities. Another one is digitalization. A lot of the money that we have agreed to spend in the next 7 years will be directed at making big strides on digitalization across the EU board. And so for a country like Greece, of course, we can't turn into a Silicon Valley from one day to the other. But it may also allow us to cover a gap that we currently have, and become more effective and more efficient. As I said, it was quite incredible to see how well the government reacted to the crisis, and how the system worked well, allowing people to go out, allowing the government to know who's going out, are they back, tracing people, tracking them down if you find a positive test, dealing now with tourism, making sure that whoever comes in the country is safe. We've had extremely few cases, positive cases of the virus. Very, very few of the tourists that come to Greece have it. So we have made strides, but we also want to join the rest of our EU partners and make sure that the EU is on top when it comes to digitalization.
Incredible perspectives, and the digital adoption and leadership by Greece and within the EU is really remarkable. And I really like the story you described, which really highlighted how technology can assist in helping with making the world a better place. During the pandemic, when you described how there was an app created for the citizens of Greece to be able to determine and to notify them of how they can go out safely, etc. That's a great example of utilizing technology to create efficiencies. And so Ideagen certainly applauds you and Greece, the government.
I didn't have much to do with this, I have to say.
Well, yeah, as a representative of Greece, I will give you some credit. And
I was proud to represent a country that did well. There's a group of leaders. It's about 8 countries, the world, that have successfully dealt with the pandemic from all around the globe. And the Greek Prime Minister is one of those 8 leaders. Again, it's it's a good story. It's nice to be spoken about in positive terms, and not be the black sheep of the family.
That's right. And so I'd like to ask you as a closing question for either emerging executives or youth across the planet. Anyone can utilize this bit of information and perspective and insight from you. Mr. Ambassador, if you were to go back to when you first started your career, it wasn't so long ago.
Right.
What bit of advice?
I had a little more hair.
What bit of advice would you give to yourself, and why?
Well, I've learned a lot from you mentioned tennis a little earlier, and I've learned a lot from sport. From tennis, you cannot always win, but the important thing is always give 100% on the when you're on the court, 100% of what you have on that day. You will never be the best player in the world, but always try to improve on what you already have. Learn another skill, another language, something that will keep you making better. And because the competition will never wait for you, they're getting better themselves. So if you have the ambition of being successful, give it 100%. Learn from your mistakes. Why did I lose that game? Well, I lost that point because I wasn't, I didn't keep a cool head, or I should have been a little more entrepreneurial, or I was too passive, or I try to see every time what went well and what didn't go well. Learn from that. Look at others. Why is his backhand so good? What is it that he does well? Why how can I incorporate that into my game? And therefore, always try to improve, and at the same time, be true to yourself. Try to be who you are, who you really are. Don't try and be somebody else. Just incorporate things that work, but make them work for you. And I think at the end of the day, you'll end up winning quite a few games.
Mr. Ambassador Ioannis Vrailas, Greek ambassador to the European Union, incredible insights, and we'll all give it 100%. I really like that advice for anyone across the planet, especially for the listeners of this show on Ideagen TV. Mr. Ambassador, what is your post-summit ask for our global audience as we continue to change the world?
My post-summit ask. I hope that this pandemic is soon behind us, that we can go back to some kind of normalcy, and that we will be using the normalcy to good account for economic, social, and democratic development and prosperity for the whole planet. I think that would be if I had the magic wand, that would be my ask.
Could not have ended this interview on a higher or better note. Your advice and insights are just incredibly inspiring. Mr. Ioannis Vrailas, Ambassador of Greece to the European Union and Permanent Representative to the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next year in person.
That's the deal.
Close range.
Confirmed. Thank you.
Best regards to everyone. Stay here.
Thank you.
Bye.